There once was a man who believed he had all the time in the world. His life was filled with the ordinary rhythm of work routine and fleeting pleasures, and although he sometimes paused to watch the sunrise or smile at the laughter of children in the park, he rarely considered how fragile and precious his existence truly was. He moved through his days like someone crossing a wide bridge without ever looking down at the river beneath, never imagining that one wrong step could change everything forever. Yet fate, which often works silently in the background, weaving moments of trial with moments of grace, had already prepared a path that would test not only his body, but also the essence of his soul. One evening, as the light of the sun dissolved into shades of violet and gold, the man suffered a serious accident. It was sudden, merciless, and unavoidable, the kind of moment that separates yesterday from tomorrow with a single strike. He was rushed to the hospital, carried on a stretcher that rolled through corridors smelling of antiseptic and urgency, surrounded by faces he did not recognize but whose hands were committed to keeping him alive. Machines beeped like anxious hearts, doctors spoke in hurried tones, and his consciousness drifted between fragments of memory and waves of pain. When he finally awoke, the room was quiet, but the silence carried weight. A physician stood at his side with solemn eyes, and his wife sat nearby, her hands trembling as though she was holding on to something invisible. The news was delivered gently but firmly. His injuries were grave, and his body was failing. Traditional treatments could prolong his life for a short while, but to be truly saved, he required a very particular form of healing, something that could only be given through a compatible donation. His cells needed renewal, a rebirth from within. And as destiny had arranged, the only source capable of giving such a gift was not yet born into the world. The doctor explained that the unborn baby his wife carried, the child they had only recently discovered, held the key to his survival. From the delicate, unformed cells of this new life, hope could be drawn. These cells, pure and untouched by the wear of years, carried the miracle of renewal. If the procedure was chosen, the man could be given a second chance at life. Yet in that revelation lay a weight of paradox. For his survival, they would need to turn to the innocence of a being that had not yet seen the light of day. At first, the man felt confusion, almost disbelief, as though the universe had chosen an impossible riddle for him to solve. How could it be that the son who was not yet born was already being asked to save his father? How could it be that before uttering his first cry, before seeing the sky or touching the earth, this child was already stepping into the sacred role of Redeemer? The man felt both shame and wonder, torn between the humility of needing help and the awe of realizing that life itself was weaving a story beyond his comprehension. His wife, though shaken by fear and uncertainty, held his hand with quiet strength. She reminded him that their child's very existence was a miracle, a gift they had not expected, and perhaps this gift was meant not only for the joy of parenthood, but also for the continuation of his life. She whispered words of faith, telling him that sometimes the universe gives us answers in ways we could never imagine, and that this might not be a burden for their child, but rather the first act of love he would ever offer to the world. As days passed, the man lay in his hospital bed, contemplating the vastness of the situation. He remembered his own father, who had once lifted him high into the air when he was a boy, who had worked tirelessly so that he could have opportunities, who had sacrificed silently without ever demanding gratitude. He realized that life is built upon chains of sacrifice, that every generation gives something of itself for the survival of the next. And now, in a reversal both humbling and profound, it was his son, unseen, unborn, and innocent, who would extend a hand from the womb to pull him back from the edge of the abyss. The procedure was approved, and with careful precision, doctors prepared the way. No harm would come to the child, they assured, for the miracle of modern medicine allowed them to borrow only what was needed without disturbing the sacred growth of life within the womb. The man closed his eyes before it began, whispering a silent prayer not for his own survival, but for the protection of the tiny being who was already greater than any hero he had ever known. When the procedure was complete, a quiet peace filled the room. His body, though weak, carried a flicker of renewed strength. It was not immediate, like lightning striking, but gentle, like dawn spreading its light over a darkened field. Day by day, he began to recover, each breath a little steadier, each step a little stronger, until at last he could sit upright and see the world not through the haze of despair, but through the clarity of gratitude. Months later, when the cries of a newborn filled the air, he looked upon the face of his son with tears streaming down his own. There, in that tiny face, in those small yet infinite eyes, he saw both his savior and his teacher. For the boy had already taught him that love transcends time, that sacrifice knows no age, and that life is not measured by years alone, but by the depth of connection between souls. The father whispered, "You saved me before I ever held you. You gave me life before you even lived your own. You are the son who saved his father." Yet this story, though wrapped in the details of medicine and survival, was never only about the hospital or the accident. It was a parable, a mirror reflecting truths that touch every life. For in the end, each of us is saved not by wealth or achievement, but by love in its purest form. Sometimes it comes from a parent's sacrifice, sometimes from a friend's loyalty, and sometimes, as in this tale, from the unspoken bond of a child whose very existence becomes the bridge between death and life. The man, now forever changed, lived not as one who had been rescued by chance, but as one who carried a mission in his heart. He understood that survival is not a right, but a gift, and every gift demands gratitude expressed through action. He began to live differently, speaking kinder words, pausing longer to embrace the beauty of the world, and offering his strength to others who found themselves in despair. He realized that the Son had not only saved his body, but had also awakened his soul. In quiet moments, he would look at his child and reflect on the mystery of it all. The unborn who became Savior, the fragile who revealed strength, the silent who spoke louder than any voice. He saw in this a universal truth, that salvation often comes from where we least expect it, and that the smallest lives can carry the greatest power. He recognized that sometimes we are asked to receive before we can give, to be humbled before we can rise, and to be saved before we can understand the true meaning of living. Years later, as the boy grew, the father never hid the story. He told it not to place a burden on his son's shoulders, but to remind him that his life began with an act of love that changed everything. He wanted him to know that his existence mattered from the very first moment, not because of accomplishments or recognition, but because he was, in essence, love embodied. And the boy, hearing this story, grew with a sense of purpose, not arrogance. He understood that his life had meaning beyond himself, and that to live well was to continue the chain of giving, to pass forward the light that had once illuminated his father's darkest night. And so the parable lingers, whispering to all who hear it that within each of us lies the power to save and to be saved. Sometimes we are the Father, broken and in need of grace. Sometimes we are the Son, offering light without even knowing it. And always, we are part of a story much greater than our own, woven together by love, sacrifice, and the quiet miracles that remind us that life is sacred, fragile, and infinitely beautiful.